make that available to you and your teams. So with that, let's jump into it. In terms of sort of etiquette and best practices for Zoom, Anthony mentioned it already. I keep the chat window open when I'm sharing my screen. So please feel free to put questions, put comments, feedback, reactions into the chat feed. I do keep that window open, and we'll try to respond in real time as we're going along. Additionally, if you need to take yourself off mute, absolutely, please feel free to do that. Don't have a problem being interrupted. We're kind of used to it and really welcome the feedback. There may be even times where I'm going to solicit, maybe call on some of my friends that I know I can kind of put on the spot, just so you guys aren't hearing the same voice throughout the entire presentation. And so let's jump into it. So this month we wanted to, and this was actually a topic that was suggested from the teams. We did a poll last year for our new staff, and we'll be doing a poll in another month or so, either in November or December. We'll be doing a follow-up poll to get your thoughts and feedback on next year's series of topics. So all the topics that we facilitated in 2021 were a direct result of feedback that we gotten from the field, from the teams. And so we're going to be sending out another poll, again, as I said, another few weeks or so to get your feedback and your thoughts on the next year's monthly topics. I think this is a great opportunity for us to get together and learn, and really excited. And so this topic specifically came from feedback that we received from the field staff. And as folks may be aware, it is actually one of the brand new modules that is on Career Edge. We had developed 5 new learning modules for Career Edge, and D.E.I, and it's actually the official title on Career Edge is D.E.I and Cultural Intelligence. And so we're doing a little bit of a remix, a little bit of a spin. And so this month we're doing a D.E.I and Cultural Sensitivity. So again, feel free to take yourself off mute at any point in time if you have questions, feedback, reactions, thoughts, and of course use the chat. It is available to you. So let's jump into it. By way of a quick disclaimer, we have about 45 minutes together in this venue. We try to be respectful of the time, again, because it is a work day, and because folks are busy, and so we don't want to take up go over too much. Even if we had the full day, I think many of you realize to do this topic real justice, we would have to do a series of presentations on this. There are entire fields of study dedicated to this subject matter, to this topic. And so we're certainly not going to attempt to do anywhere near an exhaustive job in this format, in this venue. There will be areas that would be included under the sort of the brand, the headline, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and cultural sensitivity that we won't touch at all. We won't even sort of do a hat tip to. We just don't have the time, resources, capacity, and so we'll leave those for future conversations. And understand and know that, sort of the thought and the objective, the goal for today is to kind of lay a foundation in terms of vocabulary, in terms of understanding, in terms of making sure, that we're all sort of singing from the same sheet of music. Our CEO is in the building, Chris Casilius. Welcome. Chris, do you want to say hi to everyone real quick? Just maybe pop off
Sure.
me.
I don't want to take up the valuable times because you got a lot to cover, but I just wanted to just say hello to everybody and just tell everybody how excited I am that we have the forum through the miracle of technology to get together from all points all over the country and share ideas, fellowship, and education. And Charles, thank you in particular for being such a great presenter that you are and coordinating. We're very blessed to have you on our squad, and I know you're really enthusiastic about the topics. And I would just say that this is a democracy in terms of if you have ideas or thoughts about how these types of trainings can help you or people on your team, do not be shy. I don't care how new you are. I haven't met all of you, but we get better as a company, not because we have everything figured out, but because we hired a lot of new people and they bring to the table their thoughts and ideas and vision. And so please be a visionary, share ideas. There's never a dumb idea. Sometimes the ideas that everybody snickers at once you put it out there wind up being the best ideas. So just so happy that we have a forum to be able to continually grow and expand our value professionally and personally. And we have really great people like Charles and the company who are great ambassadors and advocates for sharing important content. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up, is that it's been a tough period with COVID and everything else. And through all that, we as a company have continued to thrive. We've made adjustments, we've pivoted. And I think a lot of it is to the people on this call. You guys deserve the praise and the recognition. It has not been easy on you or your families or the funders or the clients, but we have persisted. It's a cliche, but they always say that tough times don't last, tough people do. So I'm really excited to be associated with such tough and visionary and caring folks. And just know that I'm always here to support, help, guide, or listen to any suggestions you all might have. So Charles, back to you, but welcome everybody, and I'll zip it so you can do your valuable thing today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Really excited to have you on and appreciate you saying hey. So yeah, let's jump right into it. So, we sort of put the disclaimer out there. So let's move forward. So DE&I, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. So let's talk about DE&I. Let's get on the same page in terms of terminology, what the company means when we use that language, when we use diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let's get a common understanding as we get to a place, as we continue to grow, as we continue to expand, as we continue to move into new regions and new areas and new populations, new parts of the country. And dare I say, it's been sort of a quiet goal of mine to see the company expand not only nationally but internationally. And so perhaps we will be blessed and fortunate at some point in time to have folks on this call that represent different nations across the globe. I understand ethnically we're already there, but we're all kind of located in the U.S. There may be a time, who knows, where Career Team actually has contracts in other countries, partnerships in other countries, and I, so really exciting stuff. So diversity it has to do with as we look at, as we think about, as we process that terminology, we're largely talking about, largely thinking and reflecting from a cultural perspective, So there's certainly diversity in terms of ethnic diversity. There's certainly diversity in terms of national identity. There's certainly diversity in terms of how we express ourselves. And so a nice umbrella term to do that is culture. And so when we think about culture, when we define culture, culture really is sort of a set of practices, a set of commonly held beliefs that are shared among a particular cohort, among a particular grouping, and however that grouping is identified. And so you can have cultures within cultures. You can have subcultures. Some of you maybe even have heard that term before, subculture. And so when we think about diversity, we're thinking largely about culture, cultural diversity, diversity in terms of our beliefs, in terms of celebrations, in terms of how we come together, how we acknowledge and recognize and find reasons to combine, to collaborate across a variety of spectrums. So you can have within a culture different ethnic groups, different ethnic identities. You can have within a culture different locations, geographic locations. You can live in different areas and still sort of identify as part of the same culture. James Hughes and I think it might have been Sandy when she was still here. I think James and Sandy, there were a couple of folks that did kind of a corporate culture presentation last year using the all-staff Zoom format to kind of talk about company culture and the kind of culture we're trying to promote at Career Team. Our core values is a great example of some insight, a portal into the kind of culture that we're trying to promote here at Career Team. And clearly, I mean, you can just look across the Zoom and visually, there's differences. Visually, there's variety that make up our staff, that make up our team. But the goal is for us to be unified, to come together under the umbrella of a Career Team culture that we're actively trying to create and pursue. And so when we're thinking about, when we're describing, when we're articulating diversity, we really want to kind of narrow that down and start to get our arms around and get clear on sort of what's the culture that we're referring to, what's the culture that's represented as we think about diversity. All right, so equity. Equity is different from equality. And I love this visual. Some of you may have seen this or a version of this. I think this really is, a great illustration of what it is to promote, to be an organization that espouses, to be a group, to be a cohort, to be a culture that espouses equity, which is, as we can see, different from equality. Equality is sort of that notion, that idea of a level playing field, but is it truly level? Is it truly level given what we bring to the organization, what we bring to the environment, what we bring to the culture? We're working from a variety of perspectives, and some of us may be better adapted to the environment, to the existing culture, to the existing flow or work process than others. And so do we make, here's a good word you're all familiar with, accommodations. Do we make accommodations to ensure that everyone does in fact have access, that everyone does in fact have the best opportunity to succeed, the best opportunity to have an impact, the best opportunity to move forward? And so as we think about our meetings, as we think about our programs, as we think about our orientations, as we think about our processes, are we thinking about them in terms of making sure that they are equitable, so that regardless of what someone brings with them, we're giving them the best opportunity to succeed, we're giving them the best opportunity to access our resources? And I think, folks, particularly if you're newer to Career Team, but even if you spent a week with us, I think we would agree. I don't certainly won't put words in anyone's mouth, but I think that we would agree things are a little different at Career Team. We're wired a little differently. We do things a little differently, and we have an opportunity to have a real impact, to move the needle. Chris uses that expression a lot. I think it's an important one, to move the needle in terms of actually helping people advancing the human condition. And so we want to ensure that we're giving everyone that we possibly can an opportunity to get a little bit of what we got. And if we are thinking in terms of equality, we may be missing out. We may be missing out on an opportunity to bring in a cohort that needs some additional support, that needs that additional kind of step up, that other block to help them get to the place where they can really have a fair shot at accessing our resources and our supports and our services. Let me pause here and see if there are questions, if there are comments, reactions. I think equity is one of those things that we often sort of equate to equality, but hopefully we're starting to kind of see that there actually is a difference. Does anyone have any reactions or thoughts or feedback that they want to share with the group at this point? Okay. All right. So in terms of ensuring, awesome. Thank you, Carly. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's an important value thing for all of us to espouse. So in terms of ensuring that there's opportunity for everyone to succeed, and and when we're talking about gender roles and the challenges, the limitations that come with thinking in terms of gender roles, there's lots of different ways to approach equity. I think it's particularly important for us to ensure that in our spaces, in our offices, in our programs, in our conversations, in our virtual presentation, that we are providing an opportunity for folks to come to our services, our resources, come to our programs and supports in their selves, as their true self. And so one of the constructs that as a world, as a country, as a company, that we work hard to ensure we are not defining or limiting ourselves, our staff, and our customers in terms of sort of these gender roles. You guys can read the screen. If you're new to my presentation, my friends in Houston got this disclaimer from me a couple weeks ago. We were in person. I tend not to read the slides. I'm going to trust that folks can read the slides for themselves. We try to make the font nice and big so everyone can see it. So you can kind of read it there for yourself. But if we really do want to move to a place, especially as we think about equity, that we are not limiting our customers, that we're not limiting our colleagues, that we're not limiting ourselves to this trap or this construct that particular individuals need to function in this lane or function in this capacity or function in this manner. We want to provide access to all of the opportunities that are available so that individuals, both our VIPs and ourselves, our colleagues, so that everyone has access to what's going to put them in the best position to be successful. Say it again. We want to ensure that as we are operating, as we are managing, as we are implementing our programs, our services, that we are not limiting ourselves and our VIPs to a particular slice or a particular path or a particular avenue that's limited by this antiquated notion of gender roles, but that we are really giving everyone access to all the opportunity that's available so that individuals can find the path, can find their way to bring their unique value, to bring their impact to the world, and certainly to our programs and our resources. Questions, comments, feedback? Appreciate that, Ari. Yeah, absolutely. It really is about kind of taking those taking those blinders off. So inclusion, which is a little bit different, not a little bit, it actually is substantively different from accessibility. And so when I have an opportunity to do, sort of a larger, more comprehensive presentation, I take the idea approach, IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. For those of you that have gone through Career Team University, in the general staff section, the all staff section, the general section, there's two modules right at the very end there. There's universal design in terms of our programs, and then how offices can implement universal design, or what we call people-centered programming, people-centered design. And that really is all about accessibility, about granting access, which is, again, it's different than equity, right? So, we don't have time to unpack that, but there are some important and fundamental differences between equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And so in terms of inclusion, it's about making spaces not only tolerable, but it's about making spaces welcoming. And when we talk about spaces, what we mean by spaces is sort of actual kind of physical, right? So our buildings, our offices, our cubicles, but it's also our programs, it's also our infrastructure, it's also our approach. Do individuals, are individuals, seen and acknowledged? Are they given agency? Is everyone given a voice? Does everyone have an opportunity? Do they feel seen and heard? Are their needs being, are they given an opportunity to express their needs, and then are those needs being addressed? Are those needs being met in so much as programs allow? Now, you guys have, many of you have heard me do a talk similar to this, where we sort of talk about Maslow's hierarchy of need, and where our organization is, what Career Team does in terms of workforce development. We don't have the capacity, the resources, et cetera, to sort of meet and address every need. And so even in terms of inclusion, there are some limitations. There are limitations in terms of funding. There are limitations in terms of what we are allowed to do by legislation, what we're allowed to do by the policies and procedures of the funding source. But in as much as we have the capacity to manage customer flow and customer interactions and programs, are we ensuring that everyone is given consideration, that everyone is afforded an opportunity to be included, to be represented in the programs? And so how do we do that? We do that by pushing back against the notion of ethnocentrism. I think there is a very clear difference between sort of, if you want to say pride, or if you want to talk about very positive feelings that you have about our country, very positive feelings we have about our company, very positive feelings we have about our family, our culture, cultural identity. That's one thing. Ethnocentrism really does sort of take it to the extreme, and it's this notion of, not only is the Botts family great, every other family by comparison ain't, and therefore everyone should be part of the Botts family, right? That's the danger of ethnocentrism. That's the danger of that notion that we have it figured out. We have all the answers, and by comparison, no one else does, and so therefore everyone else should do it the way that we do it. And this manifests, particularly when I use it in terms like that, I think you guys can start to draw the parallels. This manifests in lots of different ways. This notion of exclusivity as opposed to inclusion. This notion of this is the way it must be done. You have to do it this way. You have to go through and do it this way, and this is the only way that it can be done. We run into some real problems, some real limitations when we take that approach, when we espouse that kind of ideology. And I think we can look at the definition and, no, I'm not guilty of that. I don't do that. But I think if we think about it in terms of, particularly how programs can be managed, how customer flow can be executed, are we so rigid, are we so locked in that there's no opportunity for individuals that don't naturally flow through our particular process or don't naturally make their way through our program? Are we so rigid and so locked in that we are making it nearly impossible for others to access our programs and resources? Now, I think, we are not doing that. But I think it's important for us to be aware that inclusion is about ensuring we don't fall into this trap of it's worked really well. We've had a lot of success doing it this way, and so this is the only way to do it. There are other ways. And part of the reason why we have been successful up to this point is because we are always looking for other ways. We're always looking for other opportunities because we understand here at Career Team, it's better to have more different kinds of people involved in the process and benefiting from the programs and taking advantage of the resources and the services than fewer. Right? We're always trying to expand. We're always trying to grow. We're trying to get Career Edge into middle schools and elementary schools and certainly high schools and colleges. We're trying to get Career Edge into community organizations and youth programs and senior centers. We're trying to build access points all over the communities where we operate and where we function, because fundamentally we recognize and value and appreciate that we are better, that our programs are better, that our services are better when we can serve more different kinds of people. And when we develop our programs and services in such a way that people are not only tolerated, but people are actively included, that we are always working to refine and redefine and adapt so that people are included as they are, they're better served, and ultimately we have a greater impact as an organization, as a culture. And Abigail threw a great comment in the chat. Appreciate that, Abigail. Thanks for sharing. All right, so DE&I and cultural sensitivity. So as we think about cultural sensitivity, we're starting to wrap up. We're coming to the end. I told you, we didn't want to take up a ton of time, and I really would, would want to hear from folks. If maybe folks are waiting, for me to kind of get through the presentation, if there's comments and feedback, definitely want to give opportunity for some discussion if there is any. A big part of being attuned, of being sensitive, a significant portion of espousing an ideology of diversity, cultural diversity, for the purposes of our context, for the purposes of our conversation. Equity and inclusion is recognizing that unconscious bias is a thing, that it's a thing, that it's very real, and that we all have it. It doesn't make you a bad person to have an unconscious bias. I have unconscious biases. Football happens to be the greatest team sport that there is. Sorry, basketball. Sorry, European football. Soccer. Sorry, baseball. I mean, great sports, but football every day of the week. Yeah, sorry, Ari. Sorry, hockey. Yeah, but so that is an unconscious bias that I walk around. I meet a football player and automatically like, hey, you know what I mean, Jermaine? Like, hey. I'm having fun with y'all. But so, yes, sir, I see you back on camera. Yes, sir. But we all have them. We all have them, whether it comes to, again, like sort of cultural, dietary preference, right? We have unconscious bias when it comes to our dietary preference. We have unconscious bias when it comes to sort of flavor palette and those sort of things, right? Like there's just some things like I don't, don't call me whatever, but I don't fool up with whatever it is, X. I'm not gonna hold it against y'all, but some of y'all don't like seafood. I don't know how your brains are wired. I feel very sorry for you that you don't like seafood. But I feel bad that is your reality. And if there's something that we could do to help you fix that, we would want to do that. But so yeah, I'm just yes, allergies, but we can work through that. We can work through that. And I don't want anybody getting sick. Danita told us that like shellfish is like a real or seafood is like a real thing in Houston. So we don't want to mess with, you got allergies and stuff. We don't want to mess with that. But you see what I'm saying, right? Like try to make light of it. But ultimately, we all sort of walk around with these unconscious bias, and they're unconscious. So what has to happen? It has to be brought to our attention. So what do we have to do that? I think one, we have to acknowledge and recognize internally, each one of us individually, we have to acknowledge and recognize I have unconscious biases. I may not be immediately aware of what they are because they're unconscious, but I have unconscious biases. They're a result of environment, they're a result of some of it is a result of nature, some of it is a result of nurture, some of it are things that maybe I learned over time, what have you, but they exist. So that's number one. We all sort of have to commit to owning that we all have them, number one. And then number two, we have to agree as a culture, as a company, as a team, that we are going to actively promote a safe environment where friends and colleagues can bring those to our attention. The reason why they're unconscious is because we don't recognize them. And so we want to trust and we want to make room and we want to make space for colleagues and others to identify them for us. And then I think it becomes critical. It becomes important for us as an organization, as a group, to provide space and opportunity for us to look at how we're facilitating our resources and our services so that we're identifying.
Don't let me forget. The first thing I want you to do is you see me.
Did someone want to share? I think maybe Charlotte, you just came off of mute by accident.
All right.
I'm gonna put you back on mute. Okay. So, but I mean, so that's actually a good place to pause. So does anyone have experience either, safe place, does anyone have experience either addressing some unconscious biases in yourself that, maybe someone made you aware of, or you had an opportunity to do some of this work with other groups or in a different capacity in your career? Any conversation, reaction, feedback when it comes to addressing unconscious bias?
Hey, Charles, I'm gonna throw one out there. We are all serving job seekers, but on the WIOA side of things, we typically assume that customers who are eligible for the adult program, so receiving like TANF, food stamps, those sort of things, don't have good job history, or maybe they don't have the job skill set as we typically see from the dislocated workers.
Mm-hmm.
And I've typically seen, and actually I've had conversations over the last few years of how that bias has actually affected the way we serve those customers too, and even the programs that our board sometimes put together to serve those customers. So I thought that was a pretty interesting one to call out.
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one, James. And I think certainly something that we all may have been guilty of at different points in time.
Something that I thought about when I talked about my unconscious bias, especially coming into the role, I come from a very privileged background. So there's certain barriers my VIPs had faced that I had never faced or wouldn't think about until I expanded my mindset. And I would have one VIP who would arrive early for appointments, like 30 minutes early sometimes. And it's like, when you get in your schedule, it's like, I was going to get all these case notes in, and I was going to do that. Why are they here so early? And then I didn't realize that my VIP was taking the bus or walking sometimes. So she was just making sure she got there on time, versus being late, because you can't make the bus schedule yourself. So I think we talked about this in North Carolina with Dana, but it's just like, you can't make assumptions. You have to let the VIP tell you your story, because it's okay if you haven't had experience with different barriers or things to overcome, but you need to like take in that perspective and like broaden your horizons, because we just don't know. Everyone's coming from different walks of life.
1000%.
Abigail's completely right. I came from a position as a child welfare, child protective services social worker. And when I went into the job, you get the intake, you hear these cases where parents are doing horrific things to their kids, or they're addicted to drugs and are abandoning their children. And once you get to meet the parents, it could be a completely different situation. I came from a privileged background, and we just don't understand some of the things these families have gone through. And they've used a lot of the same support systems, the TANF, the unemployment, the food stamps. And we kind of judge them as sometimes being lazy, or just, choosing drugs or whatever else over their kids. But same with some of the VIPs I've seen, they just have a totally different story, and they need that person to kind of help them get back on track. And we need to really check our unconscious bias to make sure we're serving them in the best way possible.
Thank you. Go ahead, Amanda.
I hear a lot of conversation, about how career.
You're going to have to lean in closer to the mic, Amanda.
I hear a lot of conversation about how we look at our frontline staff and really think they may have an unconscious bias, but as a leader, sometimes we get surrounded by other leaders and these ideas, and we fail to communicate it to our staff in such a way that it makes sense to them, and they aren't exposed to the big picture ideas. And so we can have that same unconscious bias that everybody knows what we know and is exposed to the same level of resources we are, to make their job easier. So I think it's equally important that leaders are self-aware that they're providing their staff with the tools and the things they need to keep their job moving efficiently.
That's awesome. Yeah, Ari, please.
Yeah, I just want to kind of follow up with what Abigail and Alex were saying. And from the other side, I grew up in like a less privileged background, and I kind of have that unconscious bias for people that are privileged. And so I feel like I kind of relate to our participants in that sense, and they probably feel that way about some of our workers that are more privileged. They're like, well, you don't understand my situation, and they have that bias against them. And so I feel like I have to take that step back too when people say that to me.
Yeah, I think that's a great other side of the mirror, right? Or other side of the coin, rather, to offer that point. That I think, so Amanda brings this interesting perspective that leaders need to recognize bias that we bring in terms of how we coach, how we develop, how we assemble teams, because we sort of have our way of doing things, and it's served us up to this point, right? So we need to continue to sort of do that, and got to be conscious, and you have to be cautious, be open. And then I think Ari comes in and rounds out. I think now we have this really full picture when it comes to, as staff, thinking about unconscious bias, because I think my bias is I sort of default to many staff come from a more privileged background. And so when I'm training and when I'm teaching and when I'm promoting unconscious bias, it's many times feeling the need as the trainer to sort of deconstruct this notion of privilege. And Ari comes in and says, well, hey, there's this other perspective where we may have staff coming from underprivileged backgrounds that bring a bias of, I can relate perhaps better to the customers because we have sort of this shared experience that maybe a number of my colleagues don't have. And so Ari is saying, I need to be aware of that. I need to be aware that I'm bringing this into the environment, into the equation, into the conversation. And so I think we're starting to get like this really full picture of the different ways in which bias can show up as staff in our contracts, in our programs, in our services. Really, really important. And, again, I promised I wouldn't read the slide, but I think one of the cues is that sense of rigidity, that sense of when something is brought up, when something is introduced, when an encounter takes place, and you get that kind of stiffness in the spine, that rigidity, that that notion of not, not really flexible, not really moving, not really interested in what's going on. That's how bias that's how bias shows up. It's that sense of rigidity, and so you want to lean into that. You want to lean into that discomfort. You want to lean into that that challenge and begin to work through it. Embrace it and begin to do it. Great conversation, guys. Anything else before we just have one or two more slides? Anything else on unconscious bias? And I mean, this in and of itself is a whole entire training of just this one slide. Okay. Excuse me. And so as we are leaning in and sort of being open to and having these challenging conversations, these difficult interactions, what we're doing is breaking down the stereotypes that we hold, that we've had taught to us, that we've developed on our own. But that's what's happening, is that we're getting to this place where we are allowing people to define who they are to us for themselves. We're not allowing reputation, we're not allowing bias, we're not allowing previous experience to determine how we define an individual and ultimately how we then facilitate an interaction.
What are you talking? It's not even 1:30.
Stereotype is just that commonly held belief, that notion that isn't based on the interaction with that individual, that particular group, that particular cohort. It's based on interactions with other groups, with other cohorts that have some similarity to the interaction that you're experiencing in the moment. And so we're breaking that down. And Claire put a great comment in the chat. Make sure you guys check that out. So we're breaking those down and moving to a place where, again, we're acknowledging and recognizing the individual for themselves as they are. All right. So why does it matter? Why are we spending the time doing this? We could be doing contract compliance this month. We could be doing performance reviews this month. We could be doing critical thinking as a case manager, personality type as an outreach specialist. I mean, we could be doing more sort of directly applicable topics as it pertains to our individual roles. So why does diversity, equity, inclusion? Why does career team care about being a culturally sensitive, a culturally conscious, a culturally aware organization? And it's because all of these things are a result, that bringing differing perspectives, bringing differing points of view puts us in a position to be successful. And that is being actively lived out before us. There is the homogeneous organization doesn't really exist anymore, and the organizations, even the organizations that are really homogeneous at the top, more and more of those organizations are struggling. They're struggling to be relevant. They're struggling to stay afloat. They're struggling to maintain their size and their impact and their profitability because their customer base, the population is increasingly more and more diverse across an increasingly diverse spectrum. And so that's why it matters. This is why it matters. This is why we're going through the effort to have this conversation, to make this an important topic of conversation, because this is how we succeed. This is how we succeed individually. This is how we succeed as teams, as contracts. This is how we succeed as an organization. And well said, Kay Stacy. Yep, that's it. Above all else, how we treat, how we interact with, how we connect with others, ultimately influences our own success. So, those who embrace, you guys, I will read this because I think it is a nice kind of period exclamation mark. Those who embrace diversity, fight for equity, and promote inclusion will win. We will win. And that's what we're going for, to be an organization that wins, to be an organization that has an impact, to be an organization that changes lives. And so if we're going to be an organization that changes lives, I don't know that that's Wonder Woman's motto, Amanda, but let's go. Let's make that happen. Absolutely. No, I'm 1000%. Questions, comments, reactions, thoughts, feedback, guys. What do we think? Well, I see smiling, so smiling is good. I'll take that. Some thumbs up.
Charles, I really appreciate, especially as we were closing out, the emphasis on how diversity and inclusion will lead to success, that will lead to winning. I think oftentimes, traditionally, diversity and inclusion is sort of thought of as like something like a box to check, or like something we do for other people. And the reality is that if you are working with people who have lived in a world that was not necessarily built for them, they have really creative solutions. They bring a different perspective to groups, and they have great input about how services and what we provide can be more accessible to other people, which directly leads to that success. So yeah, it's an important part of doing this work well.
Well said. It's well said. I love the notion that bringing the perspective of individuals that have had to figure out how to navigate a world not built for them into the organization can have a real impact. Claire, I love that's, I got to write that down. I may or may not give you credit for that when I bring it up in my next training. No, I absolutely will. I love that. That's so good, though. That's so good. It is. DE&I is often, I think, not anymore. I think it is changing. But there was a time I can remember, I'm old enough to remember Miss Max. I'm old enough to remember a time where diversity was like an HR thing, right? And so HR, it's up to HR to make sure that like diversity happens, and it's over there sort of in the corner. And more, it's being embraced by operations and sales and technical support and the finance, because it needs to permeate every aspect of the business, because if there's any aspect of the business that is impacting the bottom line, and any part of business is impacting the bottom line, then yeah, the notion of DE&I needs to be infused in that. So, I'm excited that it is coming to us sort of through this channel, as opposed to, sort of this kind of tops down mandate that you got to do this to check this off. It really is in the ethos of who we are, who we want to be as an organization. I'll say it that way for sure. Awesome. Yeah, I see you, Miss Max, in the chat. I agree. It is. Anything else for the good of the group? Anything else from anyone else? Awesome. Well, I would love to keep you. I love this, guys. You know, this is like my jam. This hour each month really does fuel me. So really excited to be on. We'll try to get this out before next week. Get the recording and the PowerPoint over to you. Appreciate your feedback. Appreciate your participation and your comments. Please think about trainings for next year. We'll get that survey out. As I said, you know, not too long. We'll get that survey out. So please start to think about the trainings that you want to see for next year and moving forward. And if you want to facilitate, don't be, Anthony put it out there. Please don't don't feel some type of way like, you know, I need to be nominated or someone should pick me. I don't want to be the person that nominates myself. No, like you tell your customers, like when they're working on their resume, if you don't tell the employer the great things that you've done, the employer will never know. If you don't tell us that you have an expertise in a particular area, we may not know. So please, please think about, I see you, Mr. Hughes. Think about how you think about topics that you want presented. And if you are interested in presenting, please think about that and include that as well. All right, team, I'm available. If you need anything, please reach out. I'm here. Otherwise, you guys stay safe, stay healthy, stay in this fight. Take care.